Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace.
What makes a good decision?
The best possible outcome. No, I'm just kidding. That's the wrong answer.
I mean, hindsight is 2020.
That's a really good question. What makes a good decision? So I'm tempted to say a good outcome. It's the wrong answer, but it's the answer that kind of most immediately jumps out at me. And I think most people would say you can judge a decision by the outcome. I think a really interesting read on this is a book called Thinking in Bets, written by a former professional poker player. And the entire book is about how to make decisions with incomplete information. And when you think about it, every decision is one in which you have incomplete information. You don't have all the facts. And one of the key takeaways from this book is this idea that you can't judge decisions based on the outcomes, because every decision has so many external variables that you may not have been aware of or privy to that affects the outcome. And if you judge your decisions based on the outcome, you may have made good decisions that had bad outcomes, and you may have made bad decisions that had good outcomes. But you won't be able to necessarily judge the quality of your decision if you strictly base that on the outcomes, because it's not clear, right? What else affected that outcome outside of your decision? Probably lots of things. You know, when you consider the business context, kind of a side note here, but I was talking to somebody the other day and they were like, you know, you're a really smart business person. You're really good at business. And I was like, you know, like, yeah, okay. My ego likes to hear that. Right. But then I said, yeah, but also like timing, you know, like I was also in the right place at the right time. And like, I rode a wave, and, you know, there are a lot of things that happened that were outside of my control that enabled our success. Right. And so I'd love to say, you know, Carrie, I decided to start this business and it was a good decision because the results were good. But honestly, there were so many things that happened that I couldn't have foreseen that were outside of my control that enabled the results. That doesn't mean it was a good decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're zeroing in on something that is even broader than just talking about decisions, right? We tend to decide, ironically, you know, what contributes to a good outcome. And it's interesting because I think, you know, depending on who you are, and I'm sure there's some social science research around this, you're either going to decide that you had a lot of impact on the outcome or that you had little impact on the outcome. And, you know, there's often this bias that when things go really well, you presume you had a whole bunch of impact, right? I made all the right choices all the way along that path. Things go badly, oof, the world conspired, right? Something terrible happened that was outside of my control. When the reality is good, whatever good is, outcome, or bad, whatever bad is, outcome, all of those same forces are still at play. And so, you know, I think there's a broad lesson to be learned here around taking control and taking credit or taking blame for the things that you truly have control over, and then understanding that there's so much outside of your control as well. And then if we take that and we kind of translate that into how we make decisions or how we think about decisions, I think it can really reframe our approach in a way that creates less angst and anxiety than a lot of us have around making decisions.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, you know, in my experience, success hides faults. It's something that we tell our clients all the time, especially in, you know, a kind of a recessionary environment. What we're finding among clients, prospects, etc., is people that were doing really well in a growing economy are now really struggling. Some of them, and others were doing well in a growing economy and are still doing well. There's a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is this point about decision making. the folks who were doing well but weren't like necessarily self-critical about their own process and how they made decisions and the choices they made, they just did well because the economy was growing. They rode the wave, right? And they judged the quality of their decisions based on the outcomes that they got. And they got good outcomes largely because of the macroeconomic environment, not because they're brilliant strategists, right? But they attributed the success to their brilliant strategy and tactical execution. And then the problem is then when, like the tide comes in, right? Like the economy's not growing. You don't have that ride that you can wave anymore. That wave that you can ride rather. Then where's your brilliant strategy? Where's your brilliant execution? What's that doing for you now, right? And the truth is it was never brilliant to begin with, right? They just benefited from the macroeconomic conditions. And there's a lot of those people right now that are just struggling because they didn't have the self-awareness to judge the quality of their decisions based on the actual decision-making process. And that's a problem now.
Well, it's a problem, and then layered on top of the business problem, right? The pure business problem is that they either then go into existential crisis because they have just been, they've just done this kind of 180 between thinking that they had it all figured out and realizing that they don't. Or they still are taking, full credit for all the success that has come before, and now they're just at a complete loss, right? They're spinning, they're kind of churning because they just don't even know what to do. They don't know where to look. They don't know where to even try to make a change or an improvement. And so there's something to be said or something to be learned about, just getting clarity around this stuff and being able to be as objective as anyone can be about themselves and their own business. Or getting, building a feedback loop around yourself that creates that objectivity that allows you to kind of even out the big swings that can happen when you are progressing through life and business in the way that you're talking about.
Well, even this notion of a good outcome, right? So that could be reframed. What is a good outcome?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of decisions as feedback generators, data generators, like what is a decision? It's an action that you take or don't take. That's also a decision. That produces some kind of data, some kind of outcome, some kind of result, some kind of effect, right? And all of that is data that can be used to inform future decisions. So it's almost like thinking about success and failure. What is failure? Well, if you reframe failure or mistakes as learning that provides you with insight and clarity on how to not do it the wrong way and do it the right way instead, right? Then there is no failure. There's winning and there's learning, right? You make mistakes, it doesn't quite work out. You adjust your strategy, you correct course, and you keep doing that until you succeed. There's no failure, there's only learning. I think the same kind of mental model can be applied to decisions. What is a good outcome? What if there's no good outcome? What if
Well,
there's
it's
no good or
interesting.
bad outcome?
Yeah, it's interesting because you said there's winning and there's learning. And, we talk about reframing the failures, but I also think there's a lot of value in reframing the quote unquote successes for the same reason, right? You need to collect that data in the exact same objective manner as you can collect data from your losses. And so often we talk about it that way, right? What are your wins and what are your lessons? And we separate the two, when in reality, it's all the same thing. And if you can find that purely neutral stance and just recognize, as you're saying, that you're working from a hypothesis, right? Every decision you make, every action you take, every path you choose is based on your beliefs, on your research, on your learning up to that point. You're making the best decision or taking the best approach based on what you know. But then also recognizing in that moment that you're going to move forward, and you're going to move forward so that you can learn. And you may learn that that is a thing you want to repeat. And you may learn that it is a thing that you probably should never do again. Both things equally valuable, but I think the real trick is to be able to find the appropriate cadence and, understand, okay, like what's the speed that I want to work through this exercise? because you can make decisions too quickly and you can make decisions far too slowly. But if you think about it as data collection, to me, that changes the pace at which decisions are made as well. Because if I'm someone who's terrified to make a decision because I want everything to be, right and all of my ducks in a row, thinking about this as an experiment can help speed me up. If I'm a person who makes, quick, spontaneous, sometimes could be called rash decisions, then also thinking about this as, okay, I need to make the appropriate decision to get the right information, probably also brings me back into a range that allows me to make decisions quickly enough to get information, but not so quickly that I'm bouncing all over the place.
I guess the key is not treating all decisions as permanent.
Yes.
Which is I think a bias that a lot of people have, right? If I decide to do this, then this is it forever and ever and ever. I decide to not do this, it's never going to happen again. And that kind of permanence creates certain paralysis, right? Because we hesitate to make the decision because of the long-term consequences, second, third, fourth order consequences, all of which may never actually materialize. And if we think of the decisions as temporary, then that they can be reversed, they can be changed. They don't necessarily have to have long-term lasting effects. It's easier for us to just make the decision.
Yes. And let's talk about that, put an example behind it. Because one of the things, and given the folks that we're talking to in this podcast, one of the things that we work with our clients on is getting super clear about who is their ideal client and what is their offer. And this is a place where we see people just get paralyzed for days and weeks, sometimes months on end. And it's for exactly the reasons that you're speaking of. There's this belief, this internal belief that as soon as I, put my stake in the ground, that I can never, ever change. I can never choose or, slightly shift to a different market. I can never change how I articulate my offer. And, it's interesting because I think, some of that comes from the kind of arrogance that comes from insecurity, right? Everyone's going to see it. Everyone's going to identify me as that. And then how can I possibly go back on my word? But I think part of it is just, getting into this spin, into this analysis paralysis, and quite frankly, it becomes a place to hide. So, the fear of putting yourself out there has you not put out anything at all or put out something that, does nothing for you. When in reality, again, even approaching that, and we talk about this a lot, right? Going out, doing the research, making the best possible choice around your positioning, and then knowing that when you learn more from the people that you want to serve, you can make an adjustment.
The arrogance that comes from insecurity. What do you mean by that?
A lot of insecurity is based on believing that everyone cares about you, right? Those two things go hand in hand. So, this is the notion of I walk into the cafeteria and I'm devastated because I kind of like tripped on my way in, right, with my tray, looking for the table in high school. Oh my God, that's the worst thing that ever happened. Everyone thinks I'm a klutz, they think I'm a loser. No one's ever going to want to sit with me or talk to me again. What we know, though, is that everybody else is also so caught up in their own head that they really don't care about you at all. And so, it's kind of fascinating that the people who are the most insecure also have this inflated impression of how much people, pay attention, know, or care about what they're doing.
Yeah. Right. So I can't possibly, optimize my LinkedIn profile for audience X and then change it 6 months later because everyone's going to notice and they're going to think I'm some kind of a flake, right? Correct. Who can't make up their mind. And of course, no one's actually paying that much attention to you, which is, bad for your ego, but ultimately good for business.
Exactly.
And I imagine this is one of the challenges in making decisions, right? Is the very human desire to be right and the aversion to being wrong. And when you make decisions without all the facts, which is all the decisions that you make, but when you really think about it, you never have all the facts, which is why it's always kind of comical to me, right? The people will draw out decisions in the interest of gathering more information, which maybe sometimes is prudent, right? But let's be honest, you'll never have all the information. You'll never have perfect information. There will always be a gap. And at some point, you just have to make a decision. And not making the decision is a decision.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to, highlight that point, because that gets forgotten very often, right? Like we have this bias to action. If I take action, then I've made a decision. If I don't, I haven't. Completely incorrect, right? Not making the decision, not taking action. You are taking action. It's just sitting still instead of moving forward.
Well, and I think a big part of the challenge too is people are not trained or accustomed to thinking through second and third order consequences, right? And that's a human problem, right? So, for example, something everyone can relate to: going to the gym. The first order consequence is I'm going to be uncomfortable. I have to leave my comfortable sofa, not watch television, go to the gym, or maybe wake up early and then have to work hard there. Like, the first order consequence is uncomfortable. And that's true for most good decisions. Most good decisions will have an uncomfortable, undesirable first order consequence. The second order consequence is, serotonin, dopamine release, feel good, right? The directly after, right? Endorphins, etc. The days after, you'll feel better. Third order consequence, potentially call it that. Third order consequence would be like improved physical health, etc. Losing weight, gaining muscle, right? So like, when you consider the full scope of the consequences, it's a pretty good decision to go to the gym. If you only look at the first order consequence, it's a bad decision. And I gotta say, this is where a lot of people go wrong. I'll give you another simple example. Somebody came in to chat with our sales team, and they wanted to enroll in the program, but this person in particular had a major financial commitment coming up in about 5 to 6 months, and was really kind of cautious about making the investment to work with us because that might affect their financial commitment that's coming up in 6 months. And so, we tried to articulate that, you're going to make an investment here, but there's a return on that investment, right? Like, yes, first order consequence, I pay money. Sure, fair, good. But the second order consequences is I make money. And they were just so tunnel vision on the first order consequences, they couldn't get their head around paying money now enough to see that there's a making money consequence that comes later, right? And that's gonna enable all kinds of bad decisions if you can't see past the first order consequence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see past them. And also, if we circle back to our earlier conversation, it's the reframing about pass versus fail, good versus bad, loss versus gain, and just normalizing a steady path forward.
So we should all be just unemotional, scientific, clinical robots that have no preferences and no desires and just do things for the sake of science. So
well, this is maybe where we let AI take over, right? No, absolutely not. Let's be clear that and this is maybe another important point, because I think often when we think about someone who's making a good decision, we do think about someone who can set all of those things aside. I don't personally believe that's the path. Everything else besides just your, the actual facts also roll into a decision. So I think that you do want to consider, okay, what does this mean to me emotionally, right? How am I going to feel if X happens or if Y happens? And that's the other thing that, considering making a decision is also recognizing what are the potential outcomes that I can see, right? Knowing that there's a bunch that I probably can't predict, but what are the outcomes that I can see? And, which can I live with? Which can I not? Which ones are going to take me out mentally or emotionally? Which ones are going to give me energy? And also, pulling all of those factors in, I think will actually allow people to make a better decision.